What if I told you that the reason you feel so completely burnt out at your job today, that, persistent low-level exhaustion you just can't seem to shake?
Yeah, the kind no productivity app is going to fix.
Exactly. What if that exhaustion actually traces its exact mechanical origins back to a grain tax implemented like 4,000 years ago in ancient Egypt?
I mean, it sounds like an absolute leap of logic, right?
Yeah.
But when you actually map out the architecture of human decision-making,
Yeah.
the connection between a Bronze Age famine and your overflowing inbox becomes, well, terrifyingly clear.
It really does. So welcome to another custom-tailored deep dive. Today, we are entirely dismantling how you organize your life, your work, and honestly, your entire reality.
We're going big today.
Oh, yeah. Because most of us, when we feel overwhelmed, we reach for a to-do list.
Right.
We treat our lives like this linear set of problems.
All right, you have 10 things to do, you write them down, cross them off.
Yeah, and you just assume that once that piece of paper is blank, you'll finally feel peace. But you and I both know that literally never happens.
Never. And that's because a checklist is this one-dimensional tool that's trying to govern a multidimensional reality.
Huh.
I mean, a to-do list assumes you operate in a vacuum.
Which you don't.
Exactly. It doesn't account for your team's shifting moods or an economic downturn or even just a sudden change in the weather or your own internal emotional baggage. It's just an incredibly brittle way to interact with a complex system.
Which is why we're exploring a radically different mental map today. We are unpacking a comprehensive framework known as the gray diamond.
It's a fascinating model.
It really is. It's designed to capture the unmappable chaos of human existence and actually give it a geometry. But before we get into ancient Egypt or three-dimensional societal maps, we have to start at the exact, deeply relatable moment this framework was actually born.
Oh, yeah. Out of sheer blinding exhaustion.
To picture the scene, it's April 19th, 2002. It's 12:45 in the morning, and the architect of this entire framework has just walked through their front door and collapsed.
Just totally spent.
Right. We're talking about someone who is stretched way beyond the absolute limits of human endurance. They're teaching classes at a college every morning. They're studying for an honors degree in curriculum design in the afternoons.
Which is heavy stuff on its own.
Oh, totally. And then to pay for all of it, they are waitressing late into the night.
I mean, that is the perfect storm for a psychological break. You have the intense intellectual demand of curriculum design plus the emotional drain of a classroom.
Managing all those students, yeah.
Exactly. And then the profound, brutal physical exhaustion of serving tables for tips. In that state, your cognitive bandwidth doesn't just narrow, it basically shatters.
It shatters, but out of that shattered bandwidth, out of that pure, unfiltered overwhelm comes this eureka moment.
Right.
The author describes it almost like an automatic download, just this desperate need to organize the chaos, resulting in a sudden, crystal clear vision of a map.
A cycle that essentially governs personal action, right?
Yeah.
But surrounded by these invisible forces of society that are constantly trying to pull that action apart.
Yep. And today, we're going to build that map with you, piece by piece. We'll start with the internal engine, which is this 8-skill process cycle.
And from there, we'll dive deeply into the crucible of evaluation, how raw effort actually converts into human growth.
Then we expand outward into the 4 spheres of society, build the 3D architecture of the diamond itself, and look at the universal laws of tension that hold it all together.
And finally, we have to look at how the global shocks of 2020 stress-tested this model so severely that it shattered that 4,000-year-old paradigm we mentioned.
Forcing it to evolve into what's now called the red diamond. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the engine.
The core.
Yeah, the core of this entire framework is an 8-skill process cycle. It's an alternative to the flat to-do list bent into this continuous, unbroken loop. And the first half of the cycle is essentially the blueprint of action.
Right, and it begins with step 1. Define task.
Which seems super obvious, right?
It does. It seems incredibly obvious, but it is actually the most frequently bypassed step in modern work. Defining the task is all about establishing a crystal clear vision or mission.
Okay, so no vague goals.
Exactly. There's an old proverb that says, where there is no vision, the people perish. If you don't know exactly what the desired end state looks like, your energy just bleeds out in a dozen different directions.
Man, we've all seen this. A manager walks into a conference room, says something like, hey, we need to increase engagement, and then just walks out.
Yes, that is not a defined task.
No, that's a vague wish. Now, the framework leans on the classic SMART goals here. Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time
Wow.
focused.
Like the wallpaper of every corporate retreat.
Exactly. But the nuance applied here is what's really fascinating, especially regarding that achievable metric and, well, the psychology of friction.
This is such a critical insight. Because normally when we think of making a task achievable, we try to minimize the difficulty, right?
Make it as easy as possible.
Right, to guarantee success. But this model argues that if a task lacks sufficient friction, if it's too easy, you will fail just as spectacularly as if it were too hard.
Wow.
Because of boredom, because of total disengagement. Human beings actually require an optimal load to generate momentum. If the task doesn't stretch your capabilities or, demand some novel approach, your brain simply doesn't allocate the dopamine necessary to see it through.
So defining a task isn't just setting parameters.
No, it's about tuning the psychological tension to the exact frequency of engagement.
I love that. Okay, so once that tension is dialed in, we move to the second skill, which is planning. And this framework describes planning as a mental bridge.
A bridge.
Yeah, like you're standing on one side of a chasm, that's where you are now. On the other side is the completed task. Planning is the psychological architecture that answers who does what and by when, just to get you across.
It's basically the simulation phase. You're
Yeah.
running the project in your mind to anticipate the structural failures before they happen in reality.
Right. But I want to introduce some friction right here, because there's a paradox in this source material. We're told planning is this indispensable mental bridge. Yet anyone who has ever worked in an office knows that planning meetings are where productivity goes to die.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. The text even warns that they account for the largest share of wasted time. So how do we reconcile this? If planning is crucial, but meetings waste time, how does the model suggest we actually build this mental bridge?
Well, by fundamentally changing our definition of what a plan actually is. A plan is not a monument.
A monument. I like that.
It shouldn't require, committee hearings and 50-page slide decks to build. The framework is incredibly pragmatic about this.
Yeah.
Sometimes the most robust planning is literally a 5-minute face-to-face chat in a hallway.
Or just a quick email.
Exactly, a concise 3-bullet email. The goal is to stimulate alternative ideas and anticipate roadblocks, not to perform the bureaucratic theater of planning.
A plan is a compass, not a set of train tracks. Because the moment you actually step off the bridge and into the third skill, which is develop reality, is going to punch your plan right in the mouth.
Oh, guaranteed. Development is the mobilization phase. You've defined what you want, you've imagined how to get it, and now you actually have to acquire the physical and human resources.
Right. You need the stuff.
Yeah, you need to secure the time, extract the budget, define the specific duties, and set the quality standards.
When I try to visualize the danger of this phase, I always go back to the specific analogy from the text packing for a trip, right? Going shopping without a list.
Yes, the shopping analogy.
Right. If you don't stick to the plan during your development phase, you end up at the store buying 3 different types of expensive camp stoves, solar gadgets, all these heavy luxuries.
You blow your entire budget.
You blow the budget and load up your backpack with dead weight. And then, when you're actually out in the woods, you realize you totally forgot to pack waterproof matches. Or extra socks.
That is the perfect encapsulation of a failed development phase. It's misallocating limited resources based on impulse, rather than trusting the mental bridge you just built.
Yeah.
And if your backpack is full of useless gadgets, you're going to be completely paralyzed when you hit the 4th skill, which is implement.
Ah, implementation. Time stands still for no one. We must do. That's the mandate here.
Right. Implementation is where that theoretical collision with physical reality finally happens. The mental bridge is gone. You are now walking on the actual terrain.
And the psychological barrier here is immense, isn't it?
Huge. This is where procrastination sets in. And the framework views procrastination as a defense mechanism against the friction of reality. It destroys momentum because postponement fundamentally leads to never doing.
There's this fantastic analogy the author uses to explain the sheer willpower required for implementation, drawing from that sci-fi movie Gattaca.
Oh, I love this example.
For anyone who hasn't seen it, there's a recurring scene where 2 brothers play a game of chicken in the ocean. They swim out as far as they can into the dark water until fear or fatigue overwhelms them, and the first one to turn back loses.
Right. And the genetically inferior brother is supposed to lose every single time.
Exactly. But one day, he doesn't turn back. He just keeps swimming and he beats his elite brother. And when he's asked how he managed to do the impossible, he says something chilling. He says, "I never saved anything for the swim back."
He decided that pushing forward to the other side was closer than retreating to the safety of the shore.
Wow.
That is the exact psychological posture required for true implementation. You have to burn the boats. There's a specific threshold in any complex task where the friction of continuing feels unbearable.
And your instinct is to retreat.
Right, retreat to the planning phase. Go back to the safe, theoretical whiteboard. But if you have defined your task correctly, you realize that pushing through the pain of implementation is actually the fastest route to relief.
It reminds me of that quote the text weaves in, often attributed to Goethe, this idea that until one is fully committed, there is always hesitancy.
Yes.
But the moment you definitively commit, providence moves too. All sorts of unforeseen incidents, meetings, and material assistance suddenly materialize simply because you took bold, uncompromising action.
However, and this is key, to keep that momentum from derailing, the framework offers a vital operational rule during implementation. Stay in your own lane.
Stay in your own lane.
Yes, because when the pressure mounts, people tend to panic and start interfering with other people's allocated tasks. That creates social friction, which destroys momentum even faster than a lack of resources. You have to stick to the role you developed.
All right, so let's pause here. We have defined the task, planned it, developed the resources, and implemented it. The project is launched, the product shipped.
The first half is done.
Right. In the traditional one-dimensional to-do list mentality, this is the victory lap. You strike a line through the task, you grab a coffee, and you move on.
Which is exactly why most people repeat the exact same exhausting mistakes year after year.
Exactly, because in this cyclical framework, implementation is only the halfway point. Doing the work is essentially useless if we don't harvest the data from that work.
Right.
So we are now crossing the threshold into the second half of the cycle, which I consider the most vital part, the crucible of evaluation.
Step 5 is assessment. An assessment is, at its core, a diagnostic measurement. Did you achieve what you set out to achieve? Were you on time? Did you stay within budget?
Just the raw facts.
Just the facts. And crucially, the metrics for this assessment aren't arbitrary. They are tethered entirely to step 1. You measure the results strictly against how you define the task.
Now, assessment happens on multiple vectors simultaneously, right? You have self-assessment, that internal narrative of how you think you performed.
Right.
Then you have peer assessment, the horizontal feedback from the team you worked with. And then you have stakeholder assessment.
Which is vertical feedback.
Yeah, from the people who didn't lift a finger to do the work, but whose money, time, or well-being entirely depended on the outcome.
And the friction between those 3 assessments is where the truth usually lies. I mean, you might think you executed perfectly, but the stakeholders might view it as an absolute catastrophe.
I think about it like taking your car to a mechanic because it's making a strange noise. The assessment is purely diagnostic. The mechanic plugs the computer in, looks at the readouts, and says, cylinder 3 is misfiring.
Right, that's the assessment.
But it doesn't fix the car. It doesn't tell you why it's misfiring. It just identifies the raw state of reality. Or, to use a much more personal analogy from the text, it's like sitting in a salon chair, looking in the mirror after a haircut and realizing you absolutely hate it.
Oh, that visceral reaction, I hate this haircut. That is the assessment. But sitting in the chair feeling miserable provides no path forward. To actually grow, you have to move immediately to step 6, which is reflection.
The reflection phase.
Yeah. Reflection is the arduous, often painful process of exploring the why behind the diagnostic assessment.
Right. You hate the haircut. Now you have to reflect. Is it because the stylist cut it too short? Is it the wrong color? Does it not match your face shape? Did you just bring in a picture of a celebrity and expect a miracle?
Exactly. Reflection requires holding up the objective data against your subjective experience. It is where you pull out the original blueprints from your planning and development phases and forensically analyze where the breakdown occurred.
So you look backwards.
You have to.
Yeah.
Did the project fail because the plan was inherently flawed? Did it fail because you didn't secure enough budget during development?
Yeah.
Or was the plan perfect, but the team panicked and didn't stay in their lanes during implementation?
This requires a massive amount of ego death.
Massive.
Most people avoid reflection because it's much easier to just blame external circumstances like, oh, the client was crazy or the market shifted.
But if you bypass reflection, you can never arrive at step 7. Lessons learned. Only an incredibly foolish entity, whether that's a person, a corporation, or a government, does the exact same thing twice while expecting a different result.
Right.
The entire purpose of the first 6 steps is to mine the experience for a tangible lesson.
Think about going to the dentist. You sit in the chair, the dentist pokes around, that's the assessment. They find 3 cavities.
Ouch.
Yeah, so you reflect on it. Why do I have cavities? Well, you drink a liter of soda every day and you never floss. The lesson learned cannot just be, well, I need to get these fillings done.
Right.
If you just get the fillings and change nothing else, you'll be back in that chair in 6 months with 3 more cavities.
The lesson have to fundamentally alter your future behavior. You
Yeah.
have to change your diet. You have to buy dental floss and actually use it. And this doesn't just apply to failures, by the way. We have to learn lessons from our successes, too.
Oh, that's a great point.
Think about how humans acquire language, or how we master a sport. We assess the masters, we reflect on their techniques, and we learn by imitating their successful behavior.
Which brings us to the 8th and final step of the internal engine. And I have to admit, when I first looked at this framework, this step really threw me. Step 8 is character.
Character.
Yeah. Now here's where it gets really interesting, because I want to push back on this. We're talking about a systemic framework for executing tasks and managing projects. Sticking character at the end of this cycle feels like we suddenly dropped a philosophy seminar into a project management meeting.
Right, it feels out of place.
Doesn't that seem a bit abstract for getting a task done? Why not just end at lessons learned and start a new task?
Because lessons are not applied by sterile, unfeeling machines. They are applied by human beings. And human beings are molded by the sum total of their actions. This framework isn't just about outputting widgets. It's an ontological model.
Ontological meaning the nature of being.
Exactly. Every time you complete a task, whether it's writing a novel, managing a supply chain, or just navigating a difficult conversation with your spouse, you are forging your identity.
Character is defined here as an aggregate of beliefs, values, attitudes, and behaviors.
Right. It leans heavily on concepts like integrity, humility, courage, and patience.
Exactly. Let's say your team fails at a task. The assessment is brutal. During the reflection phase, instead of analyzing the data, the project lead deflects all blame onto the junior staff just to save their own skin.
Oh, we've all seen that happen.
Right. That isn't just a failure of management. That is a character flaw revealed in real time. By refusing to learn the lesson, they have actively degraded their own character.
There is a piercing insight in this model. Inaction is still an action.
Yes.
Choosing not to define a task because you're afraid of failure is an action that builds cowardice into your character. Choosing to skip reflection because it hurts your ego builds arrogance into your character. Conversely, facing a brutal assessment, doing the painful reflection, admitting fault, and changing your behavior, that builds resilience, integrity, and wisdom. And here is why this is a continuous cycle. You don't take your old self into the next project.
Oh, right.
The character you forged in Step 8 is the exact lens through which you will define the task in Step 1 of your very next cycle.
You approach the next mountain as a slightly different, more capable climber. It is a relentlessly self-correcting engine of human evolution. Define, task, plan, develop, implement, assess, reflect, learn, build character, and then repeat until you die.
And this is the big, but you don't do this in a vacuum.
No, you don't. And this is where the author's background in curriculum design completely explodes the scale of this model. An individual human being is a spinning 8-skill process cycle, but we are spinning in an environment that is constantly pushing, pulling, and crushing us.
Yep.
The framework maps this environment into 4 massive forces, the 4 spheres of society.
This is the horizontal arena where our vertical cycle actually lives. The 4 spheres are politics, economics, the physical environment, and the social milieu.
And we need to redefine these terms for the listener because the framework uses them in a much more holistic, almost anthropological way.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Let's start with politics.
Yeah.
Normally, if someone says politics, I think of, ballot boxes, cable news arguments, administrative legislation.
Yeah, exactly.
But this model defines politics fundamentally as who you are.
Wait, really? Who you are?
Yes, because politics, at its base level, is about the distribution of power, norms, and accepted standards. Yes, it encompasses the government that builds the roads and manages the water infrastructure. But your personal politics is the sum of your background, your age, your development, and your inherited cultural indoctrination.
Oh, wow.
It is the invisible web of rules that dictates what is considered acceptable behavior in your specific reality.
It's the history you carry into the present. And interacting with that past is the second sphere, economics. And again, we aren't just talking about Wall Street inflation rates or GDP here.
Right.
The framework defines economics as the management of time, money, resources, and ideas. And I want to laser in on the concept of time here, because that stood out to me.
Time is the ultimate currency in this model. The author applies manufacturing principles to society, specifically relying on Eliyahu Goldratt's theory of constraints.
Bottlenecks.
Exactly, bottlenecks.
Yeah.
If you run a factory, you arrange the floor so products never sit idle. If one machine is slower than the rest, it becomes a bottleneck, and the entire multi-million-dollar factory can only move as fast as that one slow machine.
It destroys the economics of the entire operation.
Precisely. So let's pull that out of the factory and apply it to a real-world scenario.
Yeah.
Imagine a crowded hospital emergency room. The hospital has state-of-the-art surgical bays, brilliant doctors, millions in funding. But if the single triage nurse at the front desk is exhausted, overwhelmed, and takes 20 minutes to process a single patient, that nurse is the bottleneck.
Right.
No matter how fast the surgeons are, the economics of the hospital's time management collapse at the front door.
The human variable is almost always the bottleneck.
Exactly. In this framework, wasting time is quite literally wasting life. Economics is the anticipation and management of constraints so that humanity can live as efficiently and fully as possible.
Wow. Okay, the third sphere is the physical environment. This is simply where you do. It is the tangible arena. The office, the highway, the server farm, the agricultural field.
But it's highly volatile.
Yeah.
It's constantly battered by external forces, technological shifts, demographic changes, sudden ecological disasters. Right. A hurricane hitting a coastline is a shift in the physical environment that instantly forces a massive recalibration of both politics and economics.
Which leaves the fourth sphere, the social milieu. This is the realm of personal interaction. It's relationships, cultural exchange, and above all, adaptability.
A society that lacks dialogue is a society that cannot adapt. And a society that cannot adapt is on a fast track to collapse. The framework highlights a profound historical example here regarding the South African context.
Right. It notes that historically, due to political isolation, South Africa experienced this massive slowing down of social adaptability.
That political isolation acted as a massive bottleneck on the country's social adaptability, even though the nation itself possessed incredible internal diversity. Multiple languages, varied cultural backgrounds, being cut off from the global dialogue, severely stunted its ability to evolve and compete on the world stage.
It proves that diverse cultures need dialogue.
Yes. Without exposing your internal social milieu to external diverse interactions, your worldview remains dangerously small.
So if I'm a listener just trying to manage a team at work, how do these four massive, intimidating societal spheres actually dictate my daily process cycle?
Oh, they map perfectly onto your internal 8-skill cycle. Think of your software team. The politics of your team, their diverse backgrounds, their core culture, their ego dynamics will dictate exactly how you could define the task.
Because if your vision violates the team's internal politics, they will mutiny before you even start.
Exactly. That makes perfect sense. Next, your economics. The cold, hard reality of your budget, your server capacity, and your deadline will absolutely dictate the reality of your planning and development. You cannot build a mental bridge that your economics cannot afford to construct.
Right. You can't plan a 6-month development cycle if your economic runway only lasts for 3 months.
Precisely. And the physical environment, the actual marketplace, the tech ecosystem, the code base, is where your implementation happens. You release the software into the wild. And because it hits the physical environment, that is the only place where true assessment can occur. The environment gives you the hard data.
And finally, the social milieu. The interpersonal trust, the communication skills of your team, your ability to handle criticism is where the reflection, lessons learned, and character building take place.
Yep.
If your team's social milieu is toxic, they will never honestly reflect on the assessment, and no lessons will be learned.
It is a breathtaking integration, right?
Yeah.
The internal engine is completely enveloped by the societal environment.
But here is where the genius of the author's Midnight Epiphany truly shines. They didn't just write these concepts down in a list, they actually tried to draw them.
They mapped them visually.
Yes, they put the 4 spheres in a circle, they put the 8 steps in the center, but drawing it flat on a 2D piece of paper felt fundamentally wrong.
Because human reality is not flat. If you try to map a multidimensional tension on a flat piece of paper, you lose the physics of the system. To understand how these forces interact, you have to pull the map off the paper and into 3 dimensions.
You have to build the gray diamond.
Exactly.
So, imagine a glass table. On that table, lay out the 4 spheres. Politics at the top, physical environment at the bottom, economics on the left, social milieu on the right. That horizontal plane is society.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Now take your vertical 8-skill process cycle, your personal momentum, and stab it right through the center of that glass table like a sword.
Suddenly, you have a three-dimensional diamond shape, a double pyramid. The vertical axis represents the individual, the task, the specific work being done, and the horizontal axis represents the collective, the society, the environment.
There is a quote from the legendary management philosopher Peter Drucker embedded in the framework here that perfectly explains why this intersection must exist. He wrote, "None of our institutions exists by itself and as an end in itself. Everyone is an organ of society and exists for the sake of society. Business is no exception. They can only be justified as being good for society."
That is the philosophical load-bearing pillar of this entire model. Your vertical process cycle, whether it's your startup, your art project, or your personal ambition, has no inherent right to exist in a vacuum. It must violently intersect with the horizontal plane of society.
Otherwise.
If your vertical task is not serving the horizontal collective in some capacity, it will eventually be rejected and crushed by the environment.
Wow. And the architecture that keeps this 3D diamond from collapsing is governed by what the framework calls the theory of opposites. The idea is that in our universe, balance is only achieved through the extreme tension of opposing forces.
Right. Light and dark, gravity and lift, north and south.
Think of it like a suspension bridge. A suspension bridge doesn't hold heavy trucks because the steel cables are relaxed. It holds them because the cables are pulling against each other with terrifying calculated tension.
The diamond works the exact same way. Let's trace these lines of tension. Look at the vertical cycle. Defined task is at the very peak of the upper pyramid. What is at the absolute bottom? Pulling against it. Assessment.
Because assessment is the literal diametric opposite of defining the task. One is the dream, the other is the cold, hard measurement of reality.
Exactly. Planning sits opposite reflection. Planning looks anxiously forward. Reflection looks analytically backward. Development sits opposite. Lessons learned. One acquires resources, the other acquires wisdom.
And implementation, the sweaty, chaotic act of doing, sits opposite character, the refined, internal quiet of knowing who you have become.
The tension is flawless, but it works on the horizontal societal plane too. The framework places politics opposite to the physical environment. Why?
Right.
Because politics represents our past, the accumulated history, the old laws, the ingrained indoctrination we inherited.
Right.
The physical environment is the absolute unyielding now. It is the storm hitting the coast today. The tension is the past trying to govern the present.
And then you have economics placed opposite the social milieu. This is a profound pairing. Economics is highly quantifiable data. It is rigid. It measures seconds, minutes, profit margins, and inventory counts. Exactly. The social milieu, however, is purely qualitative. It is soft data. It is measured in employee morale, cultural satisfaction, tears, anxiety, and joy.
It's the tension between the spreadsheet and the human heart. If you lean too far into economics, you optimize the factory but drive your workers to a nervous breakdown.
But if you lean too far into the social milieu, everyone is happy and emotionally fulfilled, but the business goes bankrupt in a week.
Balance requires both, pulling equally.
To make this abstract geometry feel tangible, the framework uses this brilliant analogy regarding music to make the abstract relatable. Every culture on Earth produces music, and truly great music relies entirely on this balance of opposites.
I love this part. Think of the vertical axis as harmony. Chords stack on top of each other, ringing out simultaneously. Think of the horizontal axis as melody, single notes moving sequentially forward in time.
Okay, so if you only have vertical harmony, you just have a block of sound. It doesn't go anywhere. It's static.
Right. And if you only have horizontal melody, you have a thin, unsupported tune with no emotional depth.
But when you intersect the vertical harmony with the horizontal melody, and you bind them together with the strict, unyielding constraint of rhythm, you create a masterpiece.
So we have the points of this diamond suspended in space. But what are the actual lines connecting the points? What is the wire holding the tension?
Communication and relationship.
Yes, from the macro level of international diplomacy down to the micro level of neurons firing in your brain, the lines forming the diamond are lines of communication and relationship.
But lines of communication can warp, and when they do, the geometry of the diamond distorts. The framework gives a highly recognizable example of this: election years.
Right. During a major political election, the societal focus narrows intensely. The point of politics, power and rhetoric, and the point of the physical environment, rallies, voting booths, physical mobilization, pull aggressively toward each other.
And as those 2 points pull together, The shape flattens. The points of economics and the social milieu are pushed outward and sidelined.
They take a back seat.
Exactly. We stop talking about long-term economic stability or social cohesion, and we only talk about power and territory. The lines don't intersect, causing a breakdown in the system. The diamond warps.
And for 18 years, the author used this gray diamond model to navigate every conceivable warping of the system. They use it as a universal decoder ring for life.
The text lists the applications, and it's staggering. They used this exact diamond structure to survive a 3-week stint in the ICU. They used it to plan international travel, to organize a wedding, to go bungee jumping.
Bungee jumping.
Yeah. Professionally, they applied it to massive curriculum design projects in the mining sector, agriculture, heavy construction. They even deployed it to manage a complex rural development project in a small hamlet of 1,800 people.
It was a robust, battle-tested paradigm. It handled every micro-stressor thrown at it. But then a macro stressor arrived. An event occurred that caused a systemic planetary shock to the lines of communication.
Which didn't just warp the gray diamond, it fundamentally broke it, forcing the author into a radical realization about the entire system.
Yeah.
Now, this is the ultimate stress test. As we transition into this final analysis, we need to be very clear about our role as your guides here. The source material begins to aggressively analyze the global events of 2020, touching on highly charged political, social, and medical policies.
We want to explicitly state that we are not taking a side here.
Exactly. Our goal here is not to validate, endorse, or debunk the author's political stance on the nature of lockdowns, government overreach, or corporate influence. We are simply reporting impartially on the content provided to look under the hood of their logic.
Because according to this model, the events of 2020 weren't just a health crisis. They were a mechanical breakdown of this exact geometric structure.
Right. According to the author, in March 2020, the interlocking process cycles of human agency shattered. The author describes this moment with a very stark phrase: "We gave our diamonds to state."
By implementing global lockdowns, the vertical axis was severed. Individuals and local communities could no longer define their tasks. You couldn't decide to open your business, travel, or gather.
You couldn't implement in the physical environment because the environment was restricted by law.
Right. The autonomy of the vertical cycle was surrendered to a centralized authority. But structurally, what fascinated the author was how the societal diamond deformed. It didn't just stop. It began running in reverse.
The diamond in reverse. In a healthy diamond, the cycle starts vertically with an inspired individual vision, defining a task that then ripples outward to influence society. But the author observed that in 2020, the engine started on the horizontal plane.
Specifically at the point of economics.
And it was driven entirely by the psychology of scarcity and fear.
Let's trace the reverse cascade as the author mapped it. It begins with the economist and corporate power structures facing the terror of systemic collapse. Driven by that economic fear, the economists speak to the politicians.
And the politicians, operating from the point of historical power, react to that fear by issuing sweeping, blunt force mandates, lockdowns, restrictions, border closures.
Those political rules immediately crush the social milieu. The way humans interact, educate their children, mourn their dead, and celebrate their milestones is completely altered.
And finally, that socially starved, traumatized population physically alters the environment. The streets empty out. The physical arena goes dark.
The process cycle ran backwards. Economics dictated politics, which chained the social sphere, which abandoned the physical environment. The individual was no longer cutting the diamond. The diamond was cutting the individual.
So what does this all mean? Why did the system fold so easily? Why did a model that worked for bungee jumping and corporate mining collapse under the weight of a crisis? To answer that, the author goes on this breathtaking historical detour.
Right, looking for the 4,000-year-old paradigm.
They look past the modern geopolitical landscape and argue that the fragility of 2020 was actually the culmination of a flawed mindset. They trace the architectural root of this scarcity-driven, centralized mindset all the way back to the deserts of ancient Egypt, specifically pointing to the biblical story of Joseph.
Now, I know what you're thinking, Joseph.
Right, the guy with the Technicolor Dreamcoat. When we hear that story, he's the hero. There are Broadway musicals about him. He's the brilliant visionary who saves his family and the entire region from starvation.
How does the architect of this framework look at Joseph and see the root cause failure of modern society?
Because we usually stop reading the story before the end. The framework points us directly to Genesis chapter 47. It asks us to look mechanically at what Joseph actually did during that crisis, stripping away the heroic narrative and looking at the sheer economics of his policy.
Let's walk through the mechanics. Joseph interprets the Pharaoh's dream. 7 years of massive abundance, followed by 7 years of catastrophic famine. Joseph is made the vizier of Egypt, and during the 7 good years, he heavily taxes the grain and hoards it in centralized government silos.
Then the famine hits.
The crops fail. The people run out of food. They come to Joseph desperate and ask to buy the grain that they themselves had grown years prior. Joseph sells it back to them until all their money is gone.
When the silver runs out, the famine is still raging. So they return to Joseph. What does he do?
He demands their capital. He says, "Give your livestock, and I will give you food in exchange." So the people trade their horses, their flocks, and their cattle just to survive another year.
But the famine doesn't break. The next year they come back. They have no money. They have no livestock. All they possess is the dirt under their feet and the blood in their veins.
And this is the pivot point of human history, according to the framework. The people say to Joseph, "Buy us and our land in exchange for food, and we and our land will be servants to Pharaoh."
Wow.
And Joseph accepts the deal. He buys the entire physical environment of Egypt for the central government. He relocates the population into densely packed cities, effectively turning a nation of free, independent farmers into absolute serfs.
But the true genius or horror of the system is what happens next. He gives them seed to plant on the land they no longer own, and he institutes a permanent 20% tax on all future yields.
The first tax system.
Exactly. The author of our framework looks at the sequence and realizes Joseph didn't just manage a crisis, he invented the foundational blueprint for exploiting a crisis to systematically transfer wealth, land, and freedom from the individual to a centralized power.
The argument is that this ancient grain tax is the genetic ancestor of our modern economic reality. For 4,000 years, humanity has simply copy-pasted this system. We replaced pharaohs with kings, emperors, and eventually democratic governments and megacorporations, but the underlying assumption remains exactly the same.
In times of fear and scarcity, you must surrender your autonomy to the center.
The text even points out the etymology of property ownership. The term real estate derives from royal estate. The underlying psychological reality is that you don't truly own your land. You are just permitted to reside on the sovereign's estate.
Which is why you must pay perpetual rates and taxes just to exist in the physical environment.
The author believes that the cascading lockdowns and economic consolidations of 2020 were not an aberration. They were the absolute pinnacle of this 4,000-year-old operating system working exactly as designed.
It's a system built on a genetic memory of enslavement, constantly propelled by fear. And the framework traces the philosophical pillars supporting this fear right up to the modern era, specifically calling out 3 historical thinkers: Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin, and Thomas Malthus.
Let's unpack why these 3 specific paradigms are indicted here. Newton gave us the physics of separateness, a highly mechanical, linear view of the universe where objects just bumped into each other in cold, dead space.
It conditions us to view ourselves as isolated individuals, disconnected from the whole.
Then Darwin gave us the biology of competition, survival of the fittest. It conditions us to view every interaction as a zero-sum game. If you win, I must lose. Life is a brutal arena where you either eat or get eaten.
And Malthus gave us the economics of absolute scarcity. The terrifying premise that human population will always outstrip agricultural supply, meaning there will never, ever be enough to go around.
Linear, separate, competitive, scarce. That is the psychological cocktail of the 4,000-year-old paradigm. And as the authors stared at their beloved gray diamond, the framework they had used for nearly 2 decades to perfectly optimize their life, they had a crushing realization.
They realized the gray diamond was flawed.
Why? Because it was perfectly designed to operate within a slave system.
The ultimate conclusion.
Yes. The text states, "I didn't see that I was trapped in the chaos of indoctrination, upbringing, and slavery for the past 4,000 years. The gray diamond made you a highly efficient, highly balanced operator, but it didn't change the fact that you were operating on a base frequency of fear and scarcity."
It was optimizing survival, not facilitating true liberation.
If the underlying code of society is fundamentally broken, and the framework references markers for civilizational collapse, like environmental degradation and the absolute inability of institutions to adapt, then optimizing your personal to-do list is like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic.
Yeah.
You don't need a better schedule. You need a new geometry of consciousness.
The model suggests we are standing at the precipice of a massive astrological and cultural shift, moving from the hyper-individualized, combative paradigm into the interconnected, cooperative frequency of the Aquarian age.
We must replace Newtonian separateness with quantum entanglement. We must replace Darwinian competition with biological mutualism and symbiosis. We must replace Malthusian scarcity with the understanding that the Earth provides absolute abundance if managed with cyclical wisdom rather than linear extraction.
And to anchor this massive evolution in thought, the author knew the shape had to change. In 2020, the gray diamond was ritually retired, and it was reborn as the red diamond.
The red diamond is no longer just a project management tool for surviving the corporate grind. It is an aspirational geometry.
A shift toward a cyclical, connected mental model.
Exactly. It represents a conscious collective intent to vibrate at a higher frequency. It is a model for building what the author calls a new Earth.
A reality where the 8-skill process cycle is fueled not by a frantic need to secure resources before someone else takes them, but by a cooperative vision of shared abundance, where the tension between economics and the social milieu doesn't crush the worker, but elevates the community. It is a staggering intellectual pivot.
It truly is. To take a highly logical, deeply practical tool built by an exhausted student, stress-tested against the spheres of society for 18 years, watch it break under the weight of a global crisis, trace that failure back to ancient Egypt, and then completely reinvent it to aim for a higher state of human consciousness.
It's the ultimate manifestation of the model itself. The author experienced a brutal assessment, did the reflection, learned the lesson, and fundamentally altered the character of their life's work. Which brings us to the end of this massive intellectual journey. We moved from an exhausted student's midnight epiphany to an 8-step engine of action.
Placed it inside the 4 spheres of society.
Built it into a 3D diamond of opposites. And finally, watched it evolve into the red diamond to escape a 4,000-year-old paradigm of scarcity.
It is an overwhelming amount of architecture to process, but once you see the lines of the diamond, you start seeing them everywhere in your daily life.
And that is exactly what we want to leave you with today. A final, provocative thought for you to mull over as you go back to your incredibly complex reality. Think about the biggest project you are dealing with right now, whether it's at work, in your family, or in your own mind. Look closely at the geometry of it.
Is your personal diamond running forward? Are you driving the momentum, starting with your own clear vision and pushing out to positively affect the society around you?
Or is your cycle running in reverse? Are you letting the economic anxieties, the political pressures, and the scarcity mindset of the 4,000-year-old paradigm dictate your every move?
Are you cutting the diamond, or is the environment cutting you?
It is the ultimate question of human agency. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly deep dive. Until next time, keep assessing, keep reflecting, and keep aspiring. Take care.